the graves of people who've passed on before. We find that people today oftentimes desire to be cremated, to be burnt, have their bodies burned. Those great mourning at the time of the passing away of loved ones. And as we think about this, all of us face the reality of death. We recognize that this is something we cannot hide from. Now, death is a reality because of sin, because of Adam and Eve's transgression in the garden. We lost the right to the tree of life. As a result of this, we die physically. So we think about the things before us. Think of Hebrews 9 and verse 27. And as it is appointed for men to die once. In Ecclesiastes, when Solomon is listing the number of things that are just things that happen on this earth, we see in verse 1 of Ecclesiastes 3, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted. But notice, a time to be born, a time to die. Now, what happens when people die? Where are the dead? Now, we begin answering this question by hearkening back to our scripture that we looked at here a while back. And we want to read in Luke, the 16th chapter, in verses 19 to 21, 19 to 31, pardon me. We studied this text for another purpose here in the last month or two. In Luke 16:19, I begin. Now there was a certain rich man, and he was clothed in purple and fine linen, faring sumptuously every day. And a certain beggar named Lazarus was laid at his gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. Yea, even the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died, and that he was carried away by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and sees Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that you in your lifetime received the good things, and Lazarus, like manner, evil things. But now here he is comforted, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, and they that would pass from hence to you may not be able, and that none may cross over from thence to us. And he said, I pray you, therefore, Father Abraham, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham saith, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if one go to them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, if one rise from the dead. As you look at our account we have before us, the text we've read here from about Lazarus and the rich man, very helpful in answering this question, where are the dead? What happened to Lazarus and the rich man. Now, some would have us believe that Luke 16, verses 19 to 31 is a parable. And so we have to stop, and it's necessary that we give this an examination. Is the account of Lazarus and the rich man a parable? Now, first of all, a parable is always based on reality. For example, the parable of the sower. Behold, a sower went out to sow. This happened all the time in ancient Israel. It happens in agricultural countries everywhere. The sower goes out to sow. That's something that's real. Again, in Matthew 13 and verse 44, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. The treasure hidden in a field is something that one can understand. It's something that, takes place sometimes. People go out and hide their money or hide their silver or gold. This is based on reality, what Jesus is saying. Again, in Luke, in chapter 10 and verse 30, then Jesus answered and said, a certain man went down from Jericho, from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothes, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite. Now, notice as we look at these things, all of these are parables, but parables are based on real things, real happenings. Is Lazarus and the rich man a parable? Now, another thing that needs to be looked at, we ask, is that this account here a parable? Is that Jesus does not state that the account of Lazarus and the rich man is a parable. He does not say, for something is like Lazarus and the rich man and their account here, or like two men who died. He doesn't say that. And furthermore, as you look at parables, no parable includes the name of a person, whereas here in Luke the 16th chapter, Lazarus is called by name. We're not talking about a parable here. We're talking about something that happened, that Jesus spoke of here, that he could take from this particular occurrence that took place after two men died, that he could draw lessons from it. As you think of James 2 and verse 26, for as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. Now, we often look at the back part, the last part of James 2 and verse 26. But here, notice that front part, for as the body without the spirit is dead. The spirit separates from the body at death. Now, in spite of the fact that Lazarus and the rich man, that their bodies were dead, it says that they buried the rich man. That in spite of this, that the Lazarus and the rich man had consciousness. Now, you look at Luke 16 and verse 23. And being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. The rich man is in the realm of Hades, where sinners are tormented. The word Hades means the netherworld, the realm of the dead, according to Thayer. The rich man could see both Abraham and Lazarus. Now notice, he possessed perception. Now, perception involves an awareness of things, an awareness of others, an awareness of objects. Also, the rich man was conscious of his pain. He had perception. He knew what was happening. Now, as we move along, it's necessary to note that Lazarus was described as being in Abraham's bosom, which is a state of comfort. It's the part of Hades where those who are not in the state of the rich man goes. It's those who are in state of a saved state, or those who are waiting for the final resurrection as one who was faithful like Abraham was. In Luke 16:25, but Abraham said, now he is comforted and you are tormented. Now, notice that you have the Lazarus. He is not like the rich man. The rich man was tormented in the flames, but Lazarus, he was in a state of comfort. Now, so notice that there's perception here that Lazarus could have comfort where he was, and the rich man would have torment where he was. The rich man, furthermore, could communicate. In verse 24, it says, then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. Now, notice that here at this time, where the rich man is, he could speak and be spoken to. There was communication. And communication is possible only with conscious beings. Again, you have this, what happened to Lazarus and the rich man. There was consciousness on the part of both of them. Furthermore, the rich man recognized Lazarus, and he requested his help by name. Or he says there, where it says there that you have, I'm moving on here, in verse, now I got ahead of myself. I see that, yeah. That the rich man recognized Lazarus and requested him by name, and that just talking about recognition. And you have recognition when that took place, when the rich man called out for Lazarus, or called out to Abraham, that was recognition. And recognition involves consciousness. Now, another thing that shows consciousness is the rich man's comprehension, that he asked that Abraham be permitted to dip, or he asked that Lazarus would be permitted to dip his finger in water in order to cool his tongue, and that cool the rich man's tongue. And he understood when Abraham told him that that was not possible. Notice that Lazarus was within the Hadean realm of comforts, but where it says, Abraham says, he is comforted. That you have a place there that's completely different from where the rich man was. The rich man was conscious of this. Now, another thing, in verses 27 to 31, the rich man asked something else. Then he said, I beg you, therefore, Abraham, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear him. And he said, no, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead. The rich man understood Abraham's words, and he even disputed with them. Again, notice what we have. The narrative implies consciousness. There's a comprehension of what Abraham has said, and there's, he is, He's, arguing with Abraham about it. In a further fact is found in Abraham's words. Abraham had a recollection where he said, but Abraham said, son, remember that in your life you have, or you receive your good things. Where there's memory, there's consciousness. The rich man could remember these things, and Abraham is calling on him to remember these things. Remember that in your lifetime, you receive your good thing. You can remember that, he's saying. Now, so you have this recollection you're talking about. This shows consciousness. Where there's memory, there's consciousness. Now, one last point. The rich man showed emotion. As we look at the verses we already read there in verses 27, 28, then he said, I beg you, therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Now, people without consciousness evidence no concern for others, and yet the rich man has emotion here. He's conscious of his 5 brothers' state at this particular time. And so as he's conscious of them and even has emotion, he's concerned that they not become to this place of torment. Again, at Lazarus, here in Luke, the 16th chapter, this is talking about what happens after a person dies. And these things we've looked at show that there's consciousness. As we put them before us all together again, a careful study of this account here shows that Abraham, Lazarus, and the rich man were all conscious after death. Their testimony is that the dead are conscious, and also with that, we recognize that Hades is a real place. With regards to Hades, the New Testament is not the first place where we find it. We find it in the Old Testament. Hades was introduced in the Old Testament under the word Sheol. The Hebrew word Sheol is defined the abode of the departed souls. As we notice that Thayer in his Greek lexicon, talking about the Greek word New Testament, the netherworld, the realm of the dead. Now, the usage of the word shows this, that we're talking about the abode of departed spirits. Notice, if you would, in Genesis chapter 37. Now, let me set where we're at right here in Genesis 37th chapter. Joseph's brothers were jealous of him. When Joseph came to see them out there in the fields far away from Jacob, they plotted to kill, or they intended to kill Joseph. Finally, they were persuaded by one of the brothers that they would sell him as a slave. And then they took Joseph's garment and they dipped it in animal's blood. And then they took it back to Jacob. And notice what happens here. It says in verse 35 of Genesis 37, and all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. He refused to be comforted. He said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Now notice, Jacob has Joseph's coat of many colors in his hands. He sees the blood on it. And he recognizes that if this is all they've got left, is Joseph's dead. But notice that he says, I will go down into the grave, and that word grave there is Sheol. It's our same word there. For I will go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Now, how can he go down to the grave to his son in mourning? How can that happen? After all, as far as Jacob knows, and he's going with this particular fact that an evil beast had torn his son apart, and his his body is not in a physical grave as far as Jacob knows. And yet he says that when he dies, he will go down into the grave. He will go down, remember the definition, the abode of the departed souls. He'll go down there, recognizes that Sheol is a place where the departed souls gather. Again, in Psalms 16, in verse 10, says, "For you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption." Now, that's different from others whose souls were left in Sheol. This is a prophecy, of course, of Jesus. But notice it says, "You will not leave my soul in Sheol." Most people's souls were left in Sheol. The soul and the spirit, by the way, are oftentimes used interchangeably. You find here, he's talking about, "You will not leave my soul in Sheol." He's talking about his spirit. But notice what you have here. This word shows that those who are left in Sheol, unlike the Jesus being prophesied here in Psalm 16:10, those who are left in Sheol, they are in the abode of departed souls. Now, people who lived during the Old Testament times believed that Sheol was the place where the spirit went after death, that the spirit survived the grave in the sense that the body did not. The body decomposed. Like Jacob's words there about Joseph, we find in Psalms 49:15, "But God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me." I notice that the psalmist believes that his soul will somehow live beyond the grave. But God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave. There's a belief in life, though the grave has claimed the body of a person. In Psalm 73:24, "You will guide me with your counsel, and afterward receive me to glory." Now, again, here we have one who expects to die, but afterward be received to glory. In the Old Testament, they believe in life after death. Again, in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 32, "The wicked is banished in his wickedness, but the righteous has a refuge in his death." Now, how could that be? Well, he would be in the place where Lazarus was there in Luke the 16th chapter. Notice how we look at the Old Testament. People who lived that time, they believed spirit that survived the grave. Now, to say that Sheol is the realm of the dead can lead to the idea that the spirit and the body both die or sleep at death. People say that, oh, well, the realm of the dead, we're talking about that when a person's like a dog, he's dead all over, just like a dog. Or there's the soul sleeping uh, position that some people take. But as we've seen, both in Luke the 16th chapter and in these verses, Sheol is a place of living spirits. People argue against that. But these texts we've looked at speak strongly in opposition to such a position. Now, another thing that we would like to look at is, as we move along here, talking about where are the dead. Death is the separation of the spirit from the body. Now we have another verse here that goes along with what we were just saying about the Sheol and what it means, and that is in Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 7. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Notice the body is the dust. It will return to the earth. The spirit will return to God. The death is a separation, body from the spirit. In Luke, the 16th chapter, as we've already looked at verse 22, so it was that the beggar died and was carried by angels to Abraham's bosom. The body of Lazarus, that it passed away. As people looked at his body, they decided, they looked at him. He is dead. It's time to bury his body. But his spiritual side went to Abraham's bosom. In Luke 23, verse 45, when Jesus is talking to the thief on the cross, he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus said to him, surely I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. That, notice here, they're going to die. Know that if you read on in Luke 23rd chapter, both the thief and Jesus physically died. But Jesus, because of the nature of promise, this man will be with me in paradise. Paradise is the realm of Lazarus, the realm of comfort. Death is separate, separation of spirit and body. Again, in the case of Stephen, Stephen was being stoned there, Acts the 7th chapter. They read that. They stoned Stephen, was calling on God, saying, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Then he knelt down and cried out with a loud voice, Lord, do not charge them with sin. Had said this, fell asleep. Notice Stephen died, but it says he fell asleep. That's a figurative way of saying he died. His body was no longer functioning. Dead. His body was dead. But Stephen expected to be alive beyond the grave. Therefore, we understand, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. There's a separation of the spirit from the body. James 2:26, which we've already looked at. Whereas the body without the spirit is dead. The body is completely without function at death. But the spirit is not. It is still in the state that we find Lazarus and the rich man and others that we mentioned here, like Stephen. Our spirit leaves our body at death. Jesus said in Matthew 28, 10, verse 28, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him, they will destroy both soul and body in hell. As we read these things, these verses are powerful, showing separation of spirit from the body at death. Now, what is the future of the souls who are in Hades? What will happen to them? Now, this brings up, this is a question that, where are the dead? What happens? They die? What's going to happen in the future? This person says, well, I believe, all right, the body's dead, the spirit is still alive, or the soul is still alive, and they go on into this realm of Hades. Well, what happens then? What's the future of those people? Jesus entered Hades and opened the gates of Hades. Matthew in chapter 16, verse 18 is the familiar text. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. The gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Notice Jesus saying, the gates of Hades will not prevail against my church. From that time, it says just a few verses later, in verse 21, from that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples, must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders, and chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day. Notice that Jesus was going to die. His body was going to go to the Hadean realm. Then he says he'd be raised the third day. Now, his spirit entered Hades. And that time, it says the gates of Hades would not hold him. In Luke, the 23rd chapter, verse 42 and 43, again, he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus said to him, assuredly, I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus went to Hades. Again, verse 46, same chapter. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, in your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. Notice Jesus was in Hades. This brings us back to what the psalmist prophesied back there in Psalm 16, verse 10. It says, will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor we allow your Holy One to see corruption. Indeed, Jesus escaped Sheol. He escaped Hades, as Peter preached there on the day of Pentecost. Speaking about Jesus, he says, whom God raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be held by it. Now, goes on to explain what he's saying. For David says concerning, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, that my right hand not be shaken. Therefore, my heart rejoiced, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope. For you will not leave my soul, Hades, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the ways of life, make full of joy, make me full of joy in your presence. Notice Peter has cited this text from Psalm 16, and now he says, men and brethren, let me speak freely to you, the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, in his tomb is with us to this day. In other words, he's saying, the people who are listening, saying, David wrote this in Psalm 16 chapter, and yet it can't be talking about him because his tomb is still here with us. David has not been risen. So verse 30, therefore being a prophet, knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that of the fruit of his body, according to the flesh, he was raised up to Christ to sit on his throne, he, foreseeing this, spoke concerning the resurrection of the Christ, that his soul was not left in Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. Now, notice that Jesus escaped Hades. His body did not decompose like most people's bodies do when they die. Jesus entered Hades, and he opened the gates. Now, this brings us to the current state of the dead in light of what Jesus has done. Jesus died, went to Hades, and then he not let the gates of Hades hold him. So, find out what's the state of the current dead. We look there at Luke 16th chapter in verse 22 and 26. We saw how the state of Lazarus and the rich man. And then in Luke 16 verses, pardon me, got ahead of myself there. it shows that the current state of the dead, that as we think of what we saw there in Luke 16th chapter, Hades is a realm wherein you have those who are in a saved state, they are in comforts, or as Jesus said in Luke 23, they're in paradise. And then there is those who are the evil ones, the ones, pardon me, the ones who are unrepentant, the ones who died without being doing the things they need to do to straighten their lives out. They are in torments, verse 25. And then we saw in verse 26, there's a great gulf between them. They cannot pass back and forth between these two compartments here, sections of Hades. The dead, think about their current state, they are in Hades waiting the final judgment. And Hades will be emptied on the last day. As you read in Romans, the 20th chapter, or pardon me, Revelation, the 20th chapter, beginning in 11, chapter 20, verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, whose faith earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God. Books were open, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. Dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the book. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Notice what we have here. It says death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. But if we back up the previous part of the text, where it says that death and Hades delivered up the dead which were in them. In other words, when it says here in the latter part about death and Hades were cast in the lake of fire, it's talking about these compartments, these sections. These were places where souls had been kept. Hades. And Hades itself, after delivering up those in it, it is cast into the lake of fire. So Hades will be empty on the final judgment on the last day. Final judgment takes place. All will come forth from Hades. As Jesus said, John 5 and verse 28 and 29, do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice come forth. Those who have done good, resurrection of life. Those who have done evil, resurrection of condemnation. Notice all are going to come forth from Hades. We have preachers among churches of Christ here in America. We're talking about preachers who would say that they are non-institutional, they're conservatives, they would say. And they will say and have said, oh, there is no life for who die in lost state. They will not go to hell forever. Rather, they will just completely just go away from existence. They will not be here. They deny what Jesus says here, that John says here. Hades has the lost and the saved in it. They will be again, they will be judged. Those who are in the saved state go to heaven. Those who are in the lost state go to hell. Okay. That those who are in the saved state are going to go to heaven, and those who are in a lost state, they will go to hell. That will be the eternal state of them. Now, as we review what we talked about here today, we have this question: where are the dead? What happened to Lazarus and the rich man? Well, they went into a realm of consciousness, where perception, communication, recognition, comprehension, recollection, emotion, all these things are possible in the realm where Lazarus and the rich man went. And then we notice that Hades was introduced in the Old Testament. The word Sheol in the Hebrew, talking about the same place that Hades was talking about in the Greek. Death is the separation of the spirit from the body. Body it disintegrates, it goes away, but the spirit, it goes to the realm of the dead. Then Jesus entered Hades and opened the gates. The gates of Hades could not hold him. The current state of the dead, as we noticed, is described there in Luke the 16th chapter. Hades will be emptied on the last day. So what happens if you die right now? Or what happens when you die? The Lord does not come back in our lifetimes, we will die. Our spirit will instantly enter Hades. Question is, will it enter into the realm of comforts where Lazarus was? Or will it enter into the realm of torments where the rich man was? Your naked spirit will wait the resurrection and final judgment. I say naked spirit because your body is not there anymore. When there's a final judgment takes place. The destiny of heaven or hell. What will be our destiny if we die? What about our loved ones? Will we try to reach them now? Try to get our loved ones to change and be what they should be? Or will we watch them later? We think of Lazarus and the rich man. They could see each other. What are your attitudes towards death? Hopefully this lesson will sober us and make us recognize the importance of living the kind of life that God calls us to live, that we could one day be with him. First, we die before the Lord comes back, not alive when the Lord comes back, be in that realm where Lazarus and Abraham were. If we are still alive when Jesus comes back, then go be with him in paradise. We talk about death, certain when that's going to happen. Make preparation in this earth. We live this life, touch ourselves, touch faith.